Bob Iger made some bold statements during the Walt Disney Company's Q2 earnings results webcast. He claimed that the television and film studios have already seen massive improvements to the quality of their content. However, there is absolutely zero evidence to support this claim. Before we get into this, I'd like to ask you, please hit that subscribe button, hit that bell for notifications so you don't miss any of our future videos here at the Trent Report. Let's get into this. This is over at thatparkplace.com. This is what Bob Iger had to say, or at least this is what he was asked by one of the investors. It seems like the operations are really starting to hum again, but I think the lifeblood of the company is always going to be the studio output. It drives so much culture. I think that's an area that you said you've been spending a lot of time on. Do you think the content is also turning a corner like we see in the operations? And if so, when do you think we might see some of the results of that for renewed focus on studio output? This is what Iger said. I feel great about where we are with the studio. Let's not lose sight of the fact that in the last year, the studio had some real success. Not to suggest that we didn't have some films that were not successful that we were really disappointed in. That's an understatement. You posted some of the biggest box office bombs in the history of the box office, complete and utter failures, ultimate catastrophe with the Marvels and Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Nevertheless, he said, but we also had some great success too in the Guardians sequel and Avatar in the end of calendar 22, but part of fiscal 23. So he's trying to bring over Avatar: The Way of Water as part of the company's success in fiscal year 2023. If you look at that, it performed way, way worse than the original Avatar, and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 performed worse than both Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, just on a straight head-to-head in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. You don't even have to adjust for inflation. And then if you just adjust for inflation, Guardians of the Galaxy, the first one, blows the third one out of the water. So even Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, yes, it might have been a marginal success. It was nowhere near the last two films. And then Avatar: The Way of Water also massively underperformed the original Avatar, especially if you adjust for inflation. Even just looking at the domestic box office, I think the original Avatar did almost close to $1 billion domestically. It's like 900,000 or something like that. And the Avatar: Way of Water, I think, only did like 400 million. Let me scroll down real quick because I did put this in here in the article. Yeah, it did six. All right, so I was a little bit off on Avatar: Way of the Water. It grossed 684 million domestically, but the original film did 785.2 back in 2009. Just to get those numbers correct there. So let's continue here with what Bob Iger had to say. He said, one of the things that I've been saying before is that volume can sometimes be detrimental to quality, and our zeal to greatly increase volume partially tied to wanting to chase more global subs for our streaming platform. Some of our studios lost a little focus. I absolutely do not believe this story at all. I think this is the narrative that he wants to sell. I think the Walt Disney Company has made it abundantly clear that they were all in on identity politics. We have numerous interviews from Bob Iger, from people like Victoria Alonso, from people like Kathleen Kennedy, from people like Kevin Feige, indicating this is what they were going to do. They created movies and television shows that push this ideology, and audiences have utterly rejected it. It has nothing to do with them trying to produce more quality to expand their global subs on Disney Plus. It has everything to do with their embrace of the woke ideology. Numerous examples of this, and all of them talking about how they were pushing this ideology into their films and television shows. And you see it in their films and television shows. One need look no further than the Marvels, which is full of intersectional feminism. So based on the fact that he's operating under the false assumption that this is this was a problem, he says, so the first step that we've taken is we reduced volume, we reduced output, particularly at Marvel. When you address these issues in movies, you do three things. You get aggressive at making sure the films you're making can be even better. Sometimes you kill projects you don't believe in. And of course, you put new things in the pipeline that you do believe in, that you have much more confidence in. And we're doing all of that. Maybe they're doing that. Maybe they're not. Time will tell. I don't think we have seen enough to see exactly if that's the case. I think the Mandalorian and Grogu announcement is tells me the opposite. I don't really feel like that is a project you would be confident in, especially after you saw The Mandalorian season 3. We saw declining viewership compared to Mandalorian season 2, despite subscriptions on Disney Plus increasing when The Mandalorian season 3 was on there, indicating that the people that were subscribing to new subscribers to Disney Plus were not watching The Mandalorian season 3, and you probably lost a significant portion of your audience between Mandalorian season 2 and Mandalorian season 3. And the fact that you're going to go off and do a movie on that does not indicate that you're following what you're saying you're doing here. That would not be a project that you would be confident in. You're also, one thing that does indicate that they are confident in is this announcement with Moana 2 that they made during the earnings call. Obviously, that film did have a ton of streaming viewership on Disney Plus last year. And so announcing a sequel does indeed make sense. And they had already previously announced a live action adaptation, obviously trying to capitalize on that success. Whether or not the second movie will be as successful as the first one, we will see. I have a feeling it probably won't, because I do think there is a soft boycott happening among parents in the Walt Disney Company, especially here in the domestic market in the United States. One need look no further than the performance of Wish and Elemental. So nevertheless, he goes on and says, I've also observed over the years that managing creativity is best done with great partnerships, and I have established great partnerships with the people at our company that really manage our creativity. Alan Bergman at the studio, Dana Walden on the television side, Jimmy Pitaro at ESPN. And the partnership that Alan and I have is a strong one, and we believe the time that I am now devoting to this and the attention that the two of us are giving this business not only will bear fruit, but it's already starting to. So we've seen Bob Iger get involved in studio projects before. Most famously or infamously was Star Wars in The Force Awakens. He's talked about how he decided to go out and buy George Lucas's transcripts or his treatments that he had for a sequel trilogy, bought them so they would never see the light of day, stuck them in a vault so no one would ever see exactly what George was working on. And they had already had a plan to do The Force Awakens again, obviously embedding feminism into that film, basically trying to rewrite the original trilogy with a diverse cast, right? That diversity was first and foremost in their mind, and that's what they did. And sure, it did well initially, but once people caught on to exactly what they were doing, you see The Last Jedi come out, absolutely massive declines compared to The Force Awakens, and then declined even further with The Rise of Skywalker. And then you had Solo, a Star Wars story in between there, where they actually lost money on a Star Wars film, the first Star Wars film to ever lose money. And Star Wars has been basically turned into a straight to DVD franchise, as it's just been kind of stuck on Disney Plus. And as I mentioned, their flagship Star Wars show, The Mandalorian, is now seeing declining viewerships, especially after season 3 and during season 3. Nevertheless, Bob Iger went on and said, we're very bullish about the films coming out. We mentioned Inside Out 2, and we talked about Deadpool and the Planet of the Apes film. We feel good about that. And obviously, at the end of the calendar year, we've got Mufasa, prequel to Lion King. We're very excited about the addition of Moana, which was the #1 streamed movie across all streamers in the US in 23, and it's had over 1 billion hours of consumption in Disney Plus, and that's now going to be released in November. So he might be feeling bullish. I would be a lot more hesitant about that, especially Deadpool. I think that there's a lot of anticipation for that film, but I also think there's a lot of kind of that anticipation is also filled with anxiety because I do think Deadpool 2 was a letdown compared to the first film. I don't think it really holds the test of time. A lot of those kind of jokes that they had were all like references to what was happening at the time of that film came out. It mocked its own kind of universe with the whole killing off the X-Force thing. And then it also eschewed the romance angle by killing off Miranda Bachran's character at the very beginning of the film. And I definitely feel like that turned a lot of people off from that film that liked the first film. So we'll see what happens. And I do think a lot of the promotion will probably push it, but I do think that people are going to be much more hesitant on whether or not they go and see that film. And I think opening weekend will really determine whether or not how well that does. And then if it gets good word of mouth, and see if it has strong legs. I don't think it's going to be the massive opening weekend that you usually see. I think it's going to be a lot more tempered. So I'm not as bullish as Bob Iger is on that film. Maybe I'm completely out of touch. But that's just kind of how I'm seeing Planet of the Apes. I think that's kind of a tired franchise, and no one's probably really interested in that at this point. I just don't see that one going gangbusters. And then Mufasa. Does anyone really want a Mufasa movie? I don't know. I feel like they've kind of drained the well on the entire Lion King franchise already. But we'll see. Maybe it will surprise me. So Iger continues and says, and then I mentioned that what we're going to do after that. I'd say we're leaning a little bit more into sequels and franchises. Some that we feel great about. Toy Story is a, for instance, obviously Star Wars, Avatar. We've talked about. Marvel is starting to focus on its strongest franchises going forward, but I'll leave it at that. I'm not really sure if Marvel's starting to focus on its strongest franchises. They just did Echo, which is like worse than an F tier character. And they tried to like get people in with Daredevil and Kingpin. Obviously, they're doing the Daredevil Born Again television series that they're having to do a creative reboot on. We'll see what that entails. The Punisher is supposed to be in it, but they're not doing anything with Punisher. I think he is one of their strongest franchises, and he's kind of been sidelined since the Netflix deal. Who knows what they're doing with X-Men? That is, I think, or should be their strongest franchise, but we have seen neither hide nor hair of any of that. So maybe that's what he's hinting at here. But there are reports that they're going forward with Fantastic Four. And while Fantastic Four is the first family, I wouldn't describe them as their strongest franchise. Obviously, I think the Avengers are above that. And Iger was talking about doing the new Avengers or the young Avengers, basically doing the diversity replacement Avengers. And that is not a strong franchise. That we saw what happened with that in the comics. Absolutely abysmal failure. And they've been trying to push that in the movies and television shows now. And it will only be just as bad as it was in the comics, just on a larger scale. So who knows what he's really even talking about there, but I haven't seen any evidence of them really kind of embracing their strongest franchise. I mean, they're still doing a Wonder Man Disney Plus show. Wonder Man, sorry to those Wonder Man fans, but he's not one of the strongest Marvel franchises out there. And they don't even have the strongest Marvel franchise, which is Spider-Man. They don't have Spider-Man. Nevertheless, he goes on and says, I think given the environment and what it takes to get people out of their homes to see a film, doing that, leaning on franchises that are familiar is actually a smart thing. So we've got work to do still. We're not resting on our laurels or sitting on our hands. We're working hard at it, but I feel quite good about the trajectory. Well, I might feel that you were actually telling the truth if we had an evidence of any evidence of this. We have nothing. The latest thing you put out was Echo, and it was terrible. So and then before that in the theaters, it was the Marvels. And then you had on the animation side, Wish. Everything has been absolutely terrible. Just look at this here. Let's scroll down here real quick. Just look at Indiana Jones. Awful. The Marvels, awful. Elemental did terrible, lost money. All of these films lost money. The only things that made money in 2023 were Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 and Avatar: The Way of Water. They put out 12 movies. The other 10 movies lost money, and that includes some 20th Century Fox stuff as well, which that doesn't include the 20th Century Fox stuff. Because the number separates Disney and 20th Century Studios, I guess is now what it's called. So that doesn't even include any of that stuff. But I mean, and these weren't just them losing money. These were catastrophic failures. The Marvels is likely to have lost upwards of $300 million. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, probably somewhere around that as well. Wish, again, probably around that $300 million or more mark as well. Pixar's Elemental, probably only lost a little bit less than that because it did bring in $486.6 million international or globally. And it had a $200 million production budget. So the break even is at $500 million. So it didn't lose as much, but still lost probably around $10 million or so. So huge failures. And there's no evidence that they are changing their content or anything like that. So it's very odd that he's trying to spin it this way. And so I think he's basically just all bluster right now, trying to convince people that they've actually changed something when there's no evidence to actually show that. And he basically just is like one of those people praising the emperor without any clothes on. So those are my thoughts on the matter. Let me know what you make of what Bob Iger had to say here during the Walt Disney Company's Q2 earnings results webcast. Let me know in the comments below. Remember to always be charitable, but to always speak the truth.